Skye Rose is the owner, designer, and my daughter. This is her boat actually. I'm building it for her. It's the only thing I know how to do, so there it is. This is the design over here. This is on AutoCAD. Boat's been designed by me in 3 different programs. One hydrostatic, one aerodynamic, and one AutoCAD 2000, where we put it all together. This is the result of the 3 different programs. Under the water took probably a year to design the shape of the hulls versus buoyancy and displacement and wetted area and all that. These are the beams. These are the beams here. These are the 2 hulls. The accommodation pod, which is in the center. The top view there. The cockpit area is 15 square meters, and the entrance to the accommodation is just in front of it. And the steering is outboard of the hulls. It doesn't come up from the hulls. They're like starboards, like the old Viking boats, one on each side, both inboard of the hulls, and they're going to steer surface piercing from the back end there, where you can see them.
This is one method of boat building, and one method that lends itself more to a DIY approach in a workshop where you can build in parts. But nonetheless, I think some quite high-end thinking in terms of the materials under use.
We put a base filler over the beam with a saw blade actually. That's where you see all these, I don't know if you can see it, but all these teeth marks are the filler being spread with a saw blade, so that only 50% of what you sand off goes on the floor. Saves us on material and it's easier. After that we put a thinner microbloom filler in, which fills it right up, and we fare it down like Will's doing over here, for hours and hours and hours with a great big board. And when it's finally flat, we prime it with a red epoxy and we inspect it, and when it's flat, we turn it over and we do the other side. There is where the mast is going to sit, and it's going to push with about 20 tons on that little spot there. So we're hoping this won't compress, and underneath there's bulkheads and there's structures and there's Kevlar and there's carbon fiber and there's everything in there. Because the boat's being built in a warehouse with a little door and we can't move it out in one piece, we've had to build the hulls independent of the beams. And the join from the beams to the hull is critical. As you can imagine, a boat doing 15 or 20 knots and one hull hits a wave and the other one wants to keep going. All you've got are these beams, 2 of them, trying to stop it from paralleling. This is the front beam of the boat, and this is the bottom curve, the one that'll actually be stretching across under here. This is the anchor locker, which sticks out the front of the front beam. And when it's turned over, it'll have some hatches in it, and you'll be able to get the ropes and anchors out of. This is the back beam on the boat, and although it's upside down, you can still see the shape of the cockpit floor. The underneath are all the structural bulkheads to obviously keep it stiff and up in position. And also a little configuration there for hoisting an inflatable up under the back beam. That's our inflatable, Prestige, and that's the one that fits beautifully underneath the cockpit flooring area, and all the pads and clamps as it lifts up will secure it in place. We're going to lift up the front beam and put it into position. We're going to dry fit it and just obviously clear the decks here so we can build the next stage. We're not going to bond it in because the door's too small to get it out. But we're going to put it in place and have a good look. And then we're going to pick up the back beam and we're going to put that in place. And here's the join up here. The beam actually straddles right across the deck. It sits on the outside of this hole on top. It should come down here like this and cover this hole and go up again. And that will allow me, when we finally make the join, to gloss and laminate up the bottom of the beam down into this skin here. And obviously the side of the beams will get glossed down onto the webs and down onto the bulkheads. So we have a full torsional box bonded down on 4 sides, especially in the corners, to try and keep the beams and the hulls in one piece, because that'd be really convenient while sailing. This is a honeycomb that we're going to build the accommodation pod out of, which is going to go up here between the beams. And since the beams weigh 730 kilos each and the hulls are 1.2 tons each, we're at 3.8. But the pod will be built out of this stuff because it's kind of non-structural. We'll be able to make it really light, maybe 400 or 500 kilos. And then it's just the mast and the boom and the others. So we might come in at 4.5 tons, maybe 5.5 when it's all loaded up and finished. You bend it into shape, you epoxy glass and laminate both sides, and then it stays the shape you want it. What we're going to do over the next couple of hours is assemble the accommodation pod, which sits between the two beams. That's the back of the pod up there, just in position, having the two bushes that support it lined up and bonded in place, the two pipes you see up there. This one's had the same, the front bulkhead. And in the next few hours, what we're going to do is clear this area, bring the floor in of the accommodation pod, which has all been double laminated in honeycomb, painted, fixed up, and we're going to plonk it in position on the floor here. Then we're going to present the two bulkheads plus the third bulkhead, which is over there against the office. That's an internal bulkhead. We'll put them in place, and then we're going to present the left and right side of the pod, which has also been epoxy laminated across honeycomb on a compound curve with a full taper for the roof. And hopefully today we'll get the whole thing sitting balanced in position so that we can start joining it, finishing it off. And the roof is still outside, which we'll laminate today and put on tomorrow. And then we have a complete boat built and ready for fitting out.
Matt's a gregarious kind of guy and invites people along to see what he's doing. I came down one day, had a look around the workshop, and I was just intrigued what was going on. And of course, as soon as you arrive at Matt's workshop, you're automatically a helper, so you get roped in. A typical day working with Matt starts with persuading him that we have coffee before we actually start work, and that at regular intervals throughout the day we have to stop for coffee. I'm not sure there is a typical day. The jobs come and go. Some days it's around woodworking days, some days it's about layup days with resin, some days it's about moving pieces around and trimming, some days it's around spraying and painting with filler. So I wouldn't say there's a typical day, and that in itself is interesting because the project proceeds in a series of smaller projects as the different components of the boat are built. So it's interesting going through the same stages but with different parts of the boat. So in sort of building up and then laminating and then fairing the hull or the beams or the accommodation pod. So the days vary a lot, which makes it interesting.
First stage was moving everything out of the workshop. So we planned everything, got a whole lot of people, all the friends, everybody. We organised a 20-ton Gallagher crane and a rigging crew, and we all arrived early in the morning. And we pushed the pod, which was sitting on the floor anyway, waiting. And we pushed that out the door, and that fitted with about an inch on each side of it. And it rolled outside, and we put that on the truck. And then we lifted the beams down with a forklift, and put them on trolleys on top of polystyrene blocks. We wheeled them outside one at a time, and the two beams and the pod all went onto one 50-foot flatbed. Then we started on the hulls, and the hulls are 52 feet by 4 feet. And we picked them up, we rolled them outside, we rolled the bow just out of the industrial door to the warehouse, about 3 meters out, before the wheels started going down the ramp or falling off the edge of the curb or anything. And then we used a crane to pick the front of the boat out, the bow. So we literally pushed the hulls out with the front being held by the crane and the back on wheels, and twisted it as we went out so we didn't have to knock the wall down. And then when the back wheels got to the lip, we put the front one back down on its cradle and moved the crane back and picked it up in 2 positions. And then we swung it out and up and around and drifted it around in circles and put it on its cradles on the truck. One hull on one truck, great big flatbeds. And then strapped it all down. And then we went in a convoy, the pod and the beams and the hulls were each on their own truck. It was about 5 o'clock rush hour traffic that we drove all the way down to the IMC and into the car park. and we offloaded everything. We dumped it all in a great big pile on the tarmac, and that was the end of day one, moving from the workshop to DIMC, to the car park. And then the next day, we all came down, and we literally put the two hulls exactly the right distance apart, and we made the tops level, and we used a hose with water in it and checked the level and the height, and then we lowered the beams into place. And then we put these great big hooks on and winched them together and pulled everything into its solid form, these great big bird's mouth beam things, and the hull would get yanked right up into the corner and held there. And we spent a week epoxy resining up the external joints. We coved it in and glued it, clothed it with 3 layers of biaxial cloth, plus minus 45, and resined it and filled it and faired it and blended it in and primed it and got it all ready for the final spray paint, so it was all in one piece. In the meantime, the pod's sitting on its own over there, and we sprayed that and fitted it and did all the bits and bobs and finally presented that to the package, and the pod was lowered into place, and that was it. And then we got to stage 3.
But I think from the way the boat's been built, it's been designed carefully. There's a lot of thought and experience gone into it, and there's a lot of care gone into the manufacture of it. There's some overbuilding going in there into the particularly stressful points on the boat. So I would say the boat will hold together in the way that it ought to. That there is, I think, a constant issue with catamarans. Tying 2 boats together with a couple of rods and letting them work together rather than independently is an interesting one from an engineering point of view.
A 70-ton crane with a radius of 22 meters, theoretically, was picked the boat up and reached out, and he had to reach out so far to get the closest hull into the water that he ran out of radius. So the alarm went off to say he was reached out too far for the weight that he had. So we actually put the boat down right next to the rocks and just put it in the water a few inches so the alarm would go off. And then we shunted it out a foot or 2 until the alarm went off, and then we went down a few inches, and we're just following the gradient of the rocks. And it went out and out and out and out, and then finally it floated, literally inches to spare. And we broke a bottle of champagne. Interesting piece of equipment. The top of the mast is hollow all the way down to the bottom, and the ropes run inside as they should. The construction is used quite a lot of stuff. There's a little marine ply as a former. There's a lot of UD, epoxy, unidirectional cloths, and carbon up and down on the inside toes, which there's a bulkhead that joins the 2 foils in the center. The size of the mast it's almost 2 meters in circumference, and the sheer size actually makes it really quite stiff, which is what you want in a mast. You want it to be integral and stiff. You don't want a floppy, wobbly thing. So it plays in our advantage. The bearing system, which is all Harken, runs up and down the back, so that the sails can be dropped while under load, which is something a bit new to cruising for me. It's fantastic, actually, really good. It rotates at the base on a 80mm solid stainless steel ball joint, so it swivels around and rotates with a couple of ropes. There's a few engineering difficulties in that, obviously, having it sitting on a ball joint and unattached on the sides. The sail actually is an extension of the mast. They foil in together, stopping all that turbulence at the front of a sail, which is usually the mast on a normal boat. The performance hops. You can feel it jump when you kick the mast in and twist it over, and it lines up with the sails.
If this boat works, which I suspect it will, then I suspect it will achieve some of its targets in terms of speed, in terms of lightweight performance.
the enjoyment gained from sailing, from long distance sailing, it's very much related to the speed that you're traveling at. And we're all spend all of our time tweaking and trimming and adjusting so that we can go a little bit faster, a little bit more exciting. The design parameter for the boat was really to build the fastest possible cruising boat that I could afford. It's a balance between having all the accommodation and the things you need to live on board a boat and the performance. She's about 54 feet long, just under 30 feet wide. She weighs approximately 5.5 tons dry. There's a lot of innovation, a lot of new ideas. The front genoa is tacked down on an adjustable prodder that actually moves from side to side, so I can adjust and line up the slot between the genoa and the mainsail. I can play around with the angle of the mast. We can adjust the shrouds with ropes.
And I promise you, you'll see the sun again.
During the summer months, I'll be taking the boat down to the Maldives, Chagos, Madagascar, Seychelles, and doing extended trips, some good dive spots, a little bit of treasure hunting around Madagascar and Bassas to India, and then back up for the 6 months good season in Dubai, where the boat's used at the moment for taking out that huge group of people that helped put it together. And Dubai is a great place for sailing. There's a few destinations, good beaches, nice wind. When my daughter was born, as a celebration really, I started building. It was the cue, if you like, naming it after her, and the photograph album that I keep is fantastic because there's the beginning of the boat and there's the beginning of my daughter, and the two of them have grown together over the last 3 or 4 years, and it's pretty neat watching the two come together. And now, 4 years down the road from the beginning, seeing the two of them out here, and she sails the boat and she is on here on the weekends and a few trips, and she runs around here like a French single-hander, you know, can't keep up with her, so it's fantastic.
Mother, Mother Ocean, I have heard you call. Wanted to sail upon your waters since I was 3 feet tall.
It was all good, from the designing to the building to the finishing, the putting together, the masts, beams, pod. Had up to 30 people all arriving on particular days to assemble and crane and move and carry things in and out. We definitely had a good time doing it, and I think we've all benefited, really.
One of the real big bonuses for me has been just being here talking to Matt. The guy's just a walking encyclopedia, really, and he's just interesting to be with, and that's been really good. And we have a laugh.
Well, yes, I am a pirate, a few 100 years too late.
Build it. Yeah.
I'm an under 40 victim of fate, arriving too late, arriving too late. I've done a bit of smuggling, well, I've run my share of grass. I made enough money to buy Miami, but